The Siberian taiga is a place where nature tests man's strength and sometimes presents riddles for which there is no explanation. Endless forests, harsh cold, eternal loneliness, and something that hides beyond the boundaries of understanding. Today we will tell you about 3 stories, each of which stirs the imagination and leaves more questions than answers. 2 hikers found hanged deep in the taiga without a single trace of struggle. A trucker who disappeared in the wilderness and then reappeared 2 weeks later, unable to remember what happened to him. And geologists whose expedition ended with frightening findings, charred circles, strange symbols, and the disappearance of the entire team. What kind of forces dwell in these places? Why do even experienced people get lost or encounter the inexplicable? It's as if the taiga is warning us, not every of its guests will come back. Prepare to learn about the darkest mysteries of Siberia, where nature is not always merciful and mysteries remain unsolved for decades. In October 2009, Khakassia was the site of a tragedy that shocked locals and raised many unanswered questions. The story of 2 hikers, Pavel Derevyankin and his nephew Dmitry Gromov, was another reminder of how harsh and unpredictable the Siberian taiga is. On October 23, 2009, Pavel, an experienced extreme tourism enthusiast, and his 20-year-old nephew Dmitry set off from Achinsk to the village of Priskovy, known for its beautiful scenery and popularity among outdoor enthusiasts. Both men planned to spend a few days riding snowmobiles and enjoying the fall views of Ivanovsky lakes. Pavel was an experienced tourist who often chose difficult routes, and Dmitry, although a beginner, was enthusiastically preparing for the trip, trusting his uncle. They took with them a basic kit: tents, some food, clothes designed for low temperatures, and snowmobiles necessary for traveling over snowy terrain. Their preparation, however, was minimal. Local residents of the village of Priskovy later mentioned that they warned the tourists about the difficulties of the route and sudden weather changes in the mountains, but Pavel confidently stated that he could cope. On October 24th, Pavel and Dmitry left Priskovy, heading for Ivanovsky Lakes. The area was familiar to Pavel, who had been here before, but this time the weather conditions had worsened. Sharp cold, strong winds, and snowstorms made driving difficult. Locals said that they last saw the tourists in the early morning when they were refueling their snowmobiles. Later, their tracks were lost on one of the passes. When the men did not return by the appointed time, their relatives began to sound the alarm. On October 27th, the relatives contacted law enforcement authorities, reporting the disappearance. A rescue operation was organized the next day, involving rescuers, volunteers, and local hunters. The search was complicated by bad weather conditions and the vastness of the territory. The taiga was covered with a thick layer of snow, and the trails were covered with snow. The rescue team surveyed likely routes, but finds were minimal. On October 29th, they were able to find snowmobile tracks that suddenly broke off in a wooded area. Further searches led to the discovery of an abandoned camp, where, apparently, the tourists had stopped. On November 1st, the bodies of Pavel and Dmitry were found on the bank of the Tatras River, 20 kilometers from Priskovy. The men had been hung from trees. Pavel used his shoelaces, and Dmitry used his scarf. The discovery shocked rescuers and locals, raising many questions about what could have happened. The investigation concluded that the men had committed suicide. Experts assumed that they got lost, found themselves without food and warmth, and, faced with the impossibility of survival, decided to avoid torment. However, this version was questionable. The bodies showed no signs of struggle or trauma other than those characteristic of strangulation. Personal equipment found nearby also did not appear to have been damaged or scattered by wild animals. Moreover, no one could explain how the men had traveled 20 kilometers through the snow-covered taiga without any visible effort or marks in the snow. Local residents and relatives refused to believe in the suicide version. Pavel was known as a man with a strong character who never gave in to panic, even in difficult situations. Dmitry, despite his youth, trusted his uncle and would hardly have made such a decision on his own. Those close to him emphasized that the men had no reason to do such a thing. Some nature researchers and local hunters put forward their own versions. Some believed that the men might have encountered wild animals such as bears or wolves. However, no signs of an attack were found. Others speculated that they could have been victims of unknown criminal elements or even encountered something unexplained, such as rare natural phenomena that could have influenced their behavior. The Tatras River, on the banks of which the bodies were found, is known for its difficult currents and dense thickets around it. The area is considered one of the most difficult to access in the region, and it is extremely difficult to get there without maps and equipment. Local hunters claimed that even experienced people would find it difficult to travel that far in a short time. The official version was that the men succumbed to desperation after losing their bearings. However, this version never explained why their bodies were in such a strange position, while their personal belongings were intact and neatly packed away. The condition of the bodies also raised questions. Despite the harsh conditions, they did not look like they had been lying in place for a long time. This case has become a lesson for many tourists traveling to remote corners of Siberia. Local authorities have increased control over the safety of travelers, and rescue services have begun to conduct additional briefings for tourists. However, for the loved ones of Pavel and Dmitry, the tragedy remained inexplicable and painful. Years later, their story continues to be one of the most mysterious in the region, emphasizing the unpredictability and danger of the Siberian taiga. In September 2017, Alexander Kovalyov, a resident of the Novosibirsk region, went on his usual truck trip. An ordinary day, an ordinary route. The man, who was 43 years old, had experience as a truck driver, and it seemed that nothing could take him by surprise. However, this flight turned out to be one of the most mysterious stories related to disappearances of people in the Siberian taiga. On September 13th, Alexander left Novosibirsk on his way to a small village in the south of the Tomsk region. His truck was in perfect condition, the tank was fully fueled, and the route had been planned in advance. Kovalyov had traveled this route many times, and the road through the taiga was not a source of concern for him. But a day later, he lost contact with Alexander. His cell phone stopped responding, and colleagues who were waiting for his arrival sounded the alarm. On September 16th, locals found his truck standing on the side of a forest road. The vehicle was in working condition. The engine was off, the gas tank was full, and Alexander's personal belongings, including his glasses, were still in place. There were no signs of struggle or damage. The location was about 50 kilometers from the nearest settlement. No hints of the presence of other people or animals were found. Immediately after the truck was found, a search operation was launched. Emergency Situations Ministry employees, police, and volunteers from local residents joined the search operation. Using helicopters, drones, and sniffer dogs, rescuers searched the neighborhood. However, there was no trace of Alexander. The taiga seemed to have swallowed him up. The rescuers began to study possible routes that Kovalyov might have taken if he had left the truck, but no one could understand why he would leave the vehicle. The truck was fully fueled, and the food and water that Alexander always took with him on trips remained untouched. The disappearance seemed like a mystical mystery. When the search yielded no results, different theories began to be put forward. Alexander's colleagues and friends said that he could not have lost his temper or panicked, as he was a balanced and experienced man. Some speculated that he may have seen something in the woods that caused him to leave the truck. However, there was no evidence to support this hypothesis. Some locals recalled stories of strange happenings in the area. They spoke of silent zones, where instruments did not work, and blind spots, where people lost orientation. Others speculated that Alexander could have been the victim of some natural phenomenon, such as strong winds, unexpected flooding, or a landslide. But weather conditions were relatively calm in those days. On September 27th, 2 weeks after his disappearance, Alexander Kovalyov suddenly appeared in one of the villages located about 25 kilometers from the place where his truck was found. He was found by locals who noticed the exhausted man sitting on the side of a forest road. Alexander was in dirty clothes. His feet were badly frostbitten. He looked emaciated, but he was alive. The man was immediately taken to the hospital, where doctors recorded second-degree frostbite, slight dehydration, and severe exhaustion. He had lost several kilograms of weight and was under severe stress. Doctors noted that his mental state was unstable. He avoided talking and could not remember what had happened to him. When Kovalyov recovered a bit, they began to question him about the events of those 2 weeks. However, his answers raised more questions than answers. Alexander recalled that at one point he felt a strange uneasiness while driving. He parked the truck and got out to look around. The next thing he knew, he was trudging through the woods. Neither the reason he left the truck nor what happened next could he explain. He claimed that he could not remember how he had gotten so far from the truck and could not remember how he had survived in the taiga. According to him, he saw no people, animals, or even signs of civilization. He had fragmentary memories of nights in the woods, strange sounds, and a bright light that he once saw in the distance. Local authorities continued to investigate, trying to figure out what had happened. There were traces of vegetation on Alexander's clothes that were typical of a swampy area, but there were no swamps within 50 kilometers of where he was found. This led investigators to believe that he may have traveled a much greater distance than was thought possible. In addition, there were marks on his shoes that could have been left by animal claws, but no obvious skin damage or bites were recorded. This only added to the mystery of his story. Alexander Kovalyov's story became a topic of discussion not only in the Novosibirsk region, but throughout Siberia. Some saw his case as an example of human endurance and willpower. Others saw something mystical and inexplicable in it. Alexander himself never fully recovered. His legs had to be partially amputated due to severe frostbite, and his psychological state remained unstable. He rarely gave interviews and avoided communication on the subject of his disappearance. Some researchers suggest that Alexander may have fallen victim to the so-called forest syndrome, a condition in which a person experiences disorientation and hallucinations due to loneliness, stress, and fatigue. Others argue that unknown environmental factors, such as low-frequency sounds that can cause anxiety and disorientation, may have influenced his behavior. However, no one has ever been able to explain why the experienced driver abandoned the truck, leaving everything he needed to survive. Why his footprints disappeared and why he was so far away from the vehicle remains a mystery. The case of Alexander Kovalyov remains one of the most unexplained stories of disappearances in the Siberian taiga. His survival is considered a miracle by many, and his story is yet another reminder of how little we know about natural phenomena and their impact on humans. Despite the end of the search, questions remain, and the story continues to stir the minds of researchers and everyday people alike. In 1990, a group of geologists traveled deep into the Siberian taiga to study rare minerals. The expedition consisted of 6 people: group leader Viktor Mikhailovich Grinev, an experienced geophysicist; Irina Zakharova, a young and ambitious geologist; 2 workers, brothers Peter and Alexei Tikhonov, responsible for the equipment; radio operator Oleg Serebryakov, and medic Anastasia Vorobyova. The purpose of the expedition was to explore rare rocks on the slopes of the Suntar-Kayata Ridge, known for its harsh conditions and virtually impenetrable forests. The area was little explored, and it was assumed that there might be deposits of rare earth metals there. However, the region was famous not only for its natural beauty, but also for its many legends of mystical disappearances, strange sounds, and unexplained phenomena. The team flew by helicopter to a base located a few kilometers from the proposed work area. From there, they had to get there on foot with a minimum amount of equipment to avoid overloading. At first glance, everything went according to plan. The weather was relatively stable, the supplies were designed for 3 weeks, and the equipment was checked. However, Viktor Mikhailovich himself admitted in a letter to his wife before departure that he felt inexplicable anxiety. 5 days after the start of the route, the group reached the first research point. It was a small valley surrounded by dense coniferous forests. The work began immediately. Geologists studied the rocks, took measurements, and the radio operator Oleg established communication with the base. Nothing unusual happened during this period except for one incident. On the second day of work, Irina and Alexei heard strange sounds like distant blows coming from the east. The sounds were like stomping or thudding on the ground. The next day, moving on, the team noticed that the compasses began to behave strangely. The arrows trembled and sometimes pointed in the wrong direction. Viktor Mikhailovich attributed this to geomagnetic anomalies typical for the region and urged everyone to remain calm. However, tension among the expedition participants began to grow. At night, several people claimed to have heard whispers or footsteps near the camp. Once Peter said that he had seen a strange shadow among the trees, but none of the team took his words seriously. A week after the start of the expedition, communication with the group suddenly broke down. The last message from Oleg, received at the base, was brief and did not contain alarming signals. The work goes according to plan. Return on schedule. However, the next day, none of the group made contact. The search began immediately. A group of rescuers, including hunters and experienced guides, familiar with the terrain, arrived at the base. Their task was to locate the expedition. After 3 days of searching, the first clues were found. Abandoned equipment was discovered in one of the glades. Everything looked as if the geologists had left the camp in a hurry. The tents were torn, some things were lying around in disarray, but there were no signs of struggle or blood. After a few days of searching, the rescue team came across the first trail, which immediately caused bewilderment and alarm. In a small clearing surrounded by dense pine trees, they found a ring of charred earth. Nothing was growing inside the ring, and the soil was strangely dry and warm to the touch, despite the cool weather. Among the circle were scraps of clothing that belonged to Alexei Tikhonov, one of the workers of the expedition. However, the most gruesome find was nearby. Inside the ring was a fragment of a tooth, which was later identified as human, but it was strangely deformed, as if it had been exposed to high temperatures. Moving on, the rescuers found another strange detail. Irina Zakharova's backpack, which was tied to a branch with a red ribbon, which was not in the original equipment. The ribbon, on closer inspection, bore symbols resembling ancient runes or signs, the meaning of which no one could explain. The creepiest discovery awaited the group at the next stop. In one of the depressions in the ground, which could have been an old forest den, they found a strange object. It was a burnt notebook, which, as later confirmed, belonged to Viktor Grinev. The sheets of the notebook were only partially preserved, and the text on them was mostly illegible, but the last pages contained horrifying fragments of notes. I don't understand what's going on, but this is where the end awaits us. Next to the notebook, they found branches folded in a strange pattern resembling some sort of primitive altar. Scattered around were human hair, which experts later identified as belonging to Ira Zakharova. These findings only increased the mystery of the disappearance of the geological group. There were no logical explanations for what had happened, and even the most experienced rescuers began to avoid discussing what had happened, fearing that things could get worse. The disappearance of the geological expedition in 1990 in the Siberian taiga became one of the most mysterious and tragic stories, surrounded by rumors, speculation, and conjecture. Years after a search that yielded no encouraging results, the official investigation was closed. The official version was an accident caused by harsh natural conditions. However, the many details found during the search raised many more questions than answers. Most disturbing to investigators and searchers remained the nature of the evidence found. The charred circle, the tattered tent, the strange symbols on the tape, the manuscript of Viktor Grinev, all this did not fit into the framework of standard explanations. Even decades later, experts could not give a definite answer as to what could have led to such finds. The psychological impact of the group's disappearance was felt by everyone involved in the search. Several members of the search team admitted years later that they still have nightmares about those days. One of the rescuers claimed that in the rumblings heard in the woods, he recognized not just a sound, but something that sounded like words. Another rescuer, after quitting the service, admitted that she had never returned to the forest since then, considering it a cursed place. Among the locals, the disappearance of the expedition was covered with mystical stories. Some spoke of ancient spirits of the forest that guarded the area from outsiders. Others speculated that the geologists had accidentally stumbled upon some ancient anomaly or place of power, disturbing its peace. There were also those who claimed that strange events had occurred in the area many times before, including the disappearance of hunters and travelers. The scientists who analyzed the case came up with several rational hypotheses. Some speculated that the expedition may have fallen victim to toxic emissions from underground. Gases such as methane or hydrogen sulfide could have caused hallucinations, disorientation, and even death. However, this did not explain the state of the evidence, such as charred objects or strange symbols. The most controversial theory concerned human intervention. Proponents of this theory suggested that the group could have been victimized by unknown criminals or military experiments. Footprints at the sites resembling an altar or ritual could have been part of an elaborate staging. But who could have been stalking the geologists in such a remote area, and why? These questions remained unanswered. Years after the disappearance of the expedition, the case was remembered only by researchers of anomalous phenomena and fans of mysteries. Periodically on the forums appeared rumors of new findings, but none of them was not officially confirmed. The story of a group of geologists who disappeared in the Siberian taiga has become a legend that warns, some secrets of nature are better left unsolved. All records of the incident were classified, and now it is known only from oral accounts and publications on mystical forums. That's it. Taiga will always remain a place where nature and mysticism intertwine into something frighteningly beautiful and inexplicable. What do you think of these stories? Do you believe there is more behind them than random tragedies? Write your comments, share your thoughts and versions. Don't forget to put likes and subscribe to the channel not to miss new mysterious stories. And if you have your own strange or unexplained cases, be sure to share them. Maybe your story will be the topic for the next issue. Thanks for watching, and remember, the taiga does not forgive mistakes. The High Tatras is a rugged but beautiful mountain range that attracts climbers, tourists, and explorers with its wild nature and dangerous routes. However, in the history of these mountains, there are pages covered with mystery and unexplained disappearances that still remain a mystery for rescuers and explorers. They went into the mountains, experienced travelers, families, hunters, and foresters who knew the terrain well. They planned their usual routes. They were not going to take any risks. They warned their loved ones about the time of their return. But at some point, traces of their presence were suddenly cut off, and their fate remained unknown. Where did they disappear? How could this happen in places that had been thoroughly explored by search teams? Why did their equipment and belongings end up in locations they couldn't get to on their own? Today we will tell you about some of the strangest cases of disappearances in the Tatras. Realistic, documented stories where the mysteries multiply with every trace found. These are not legends, not fiction. These are real people who left behind strange traces and unsolvable questions. Thomas Kolar was an experienced mountaineer, known in the small circles of Bratislava as a man who preferred extreme climbing alone. However, on that fateful day, September 12, 2001, he climbed the Gerlakovsky Stitit as part of a group of 5. It was not his first visit to the High Tatras. He had conquered this massif many times, knew the terrain, weather conditions, routes, and could not just disappear without a trace. But that's exactly what happened. The ascent started at 6:30 a.m. from Slezský Dom, a popular mountain refuge in the Tatras. The group followed a standard route through the Velika Valley, avoiding difficult sections as 2 of the participants had no serious mountaineering experience. Despite strong wind and cloud cover, all 5 reached the summit safely at 11:40 a.m. They spent no more than 15 minutes on the summit, took pictures, had a snack, and started their descent. The descent was slow and visibility was reduced due to fog. At about 2450 meters, when the group reached the crest, Tomas suddenly stopped. He said he had a problem with his shoes. The carabiner on his crampons had broken. Since the section was technically difficult, the group offered to wait, but Tomas assured them that he could manage on his own. He said he would catch up with them in a few minutes. The group continued their descent. They went about 500 meters down, but they still did not see Tomas. Then one of the participants took out a whistle and signaled, and the same sound was heard in response. A few minutes later, a second signal was heard, but it was more muffled, then silence. Then, when Tomas did not show up at the camp at the bottom, his friends sounded the alarm. Rescuers from the Tatra mountain service, volunteers, and even an army helicopter joined the search. For 3 weeks, all possible ways of descent were examined, including areas where he might have accidentally slipped or fallen. But no trace of Tomas was ever found. No remnants of rope, no equipment, no torn clothing. In the harsh highlands, his body should have been found, but it was as if it had disappeared. The only clue came on the 6th day of the search. One of the rescuers noticed fresh shoe tracks on a steep slope, but they abruptly broke off on a small ledge. Under the ledge is a 300-meter cliff. The logical assumption would be that Tomas had fallen off, but there was nothing below, no body, no sign of impact. Another strange detail: his whistle was never found. Even if he had fallen, the whistle, the carbine, or some of his equipment should have been left behind. It's been 3 years. Officially, the search was stopped in November 2001, but climbers who knew Tomas never gave up trying to solve the mystery of his disappearance. In July 2004, a group of Slovak climbers passing through the Lanic Ridge, more than 20 kilometers from the place of disappearance, came across a climbing carabiner with the remains of the rope. It had Tomas's initials on it, and a check confirmed that the equipment belonged to Thomas Kolar. But the strangest part was something else. The carabiner was in a place he couldn't have gotten to on his own. This area is one of the most inaccessible places in the Tatras. To get there, Tomas had to walk 20 kilometers through glaciers and rock ridges without equipment, without food or water, and without leaving any traces on the way. What's more, the carbine didn't look like it had been sitting for 3 years in harsh conditions. The strap that was attached to it showed no signs of prolonged decomposition, as if it had been left there only recently. Since the discovery of Thomas Kolar's carbine in 2004, questions about its disappearance have only multiplied. Officially, the investigation could not explain how the equipment could have ended up on the Lanic Ridge, which was more than 20 kilometers away from the place where he was last contacted. Moreover, if his body had been carried by snow, avalanche, or glacier, why then had not a single piece of his clothing, backpack, or other pieces of equipment been found? Early official speculation pointed to natural causes. Perhaps Tomas became disoriented in the fog, strayed off the route, and went too far away. With the drastic temperature difference, strong winds, and lack of oxygen, he could have died of hypothermia. However, rescuers raised another question. Even if that was the case, why had the body not been found in all the years of searching? Other theories pointed to third-party intervention. In those years, poachers were sometimes found in the mountains, and traces of illegal hunting were repeatedly found in remote areas of the Tatras. However, the absence of signs of a struggle and the nature of the find spoke against this theory. If Tomas had really been killed, his body could not have been so far away, and even without a trace. The summer of 1983 was hot, and the Stanek family, Rudolf 39, Veronica 36, and their 7-year-old daughter Lenka, decided to spend their vacation in the high Tatras, enjoying nature and short hikes to mountain lakes. They chose Markov Siedlo as the starting point, and the final destination of the hike was to be one of the picturesque lakes, Popradskie Pleso, popular among tourists. According to family friends, it was an ordinary walk for nature lovers. The route passed through the Popradska Valley, was used by hundreds of travelers each year and was considered relatively safe. The family left the Grand Hotel Smokovec on the morning of July 14, 1983, informing the staff that they planned to return for dinner. They took light backpacks with snacks, a supply of water, and clothing in case of inclement weather. They were seen by other hikers along the way. The family looked cheerful, walking at a good pace, and little Lenka was happy to walk, occasionally picking flowers along the trail. No one noticed anything strange except one witness, an elderly tourist from the Czech Republic, who remembered that at a certain moment the family slowed down and the father began to scrutinize something outside the trail. What exactly it was, she couldn't say. By late afternoon, when the family didn't return to the hotel, the alarm began. At first, the staff thought they might have just been delayed, but by midnight, it was clear that something strange had happened. When the morning of July 15th came, the alarm bell was raised and High Tatras Search and Rescue launched an operation to find the missing family. Their footprints broke off in the middle of the trail. At dawn on July 15th, the High Tatras Search and Rescue Service began combing the route the Stanek family was taking. At first, rescuers were confident that they would find them in the next few hours. Perhaps they had simply lost their bearings, gotten lost, or hid from the night's cold. The operation covered the main trails leading to Popradsky Pleso, as well as the neighborhoods of Veliki Lake and Gerlikovsky Shield, which were in relative proximity. The problem was that there were no tracks. The rescuers expected to find traces of a campfire, things left behind, but they found nothing. A few hikers recalled seeing the family, but no one could say which direction they had gone in the afternoon. The last confirmed sighting of the family was at 1:40 p.m., when they were spotted near Ostrava, at an elevation of 1,980 meters. After that, it was a blank. Towards the end of the second day of the search, rescuers began to feel real anxiety. It was relatively warm in the mountains, but at night the temperature dropped to +4 degrees C. If the family spent the night in the forest or among the rocks, they could be in danger of hypothermia. On the third day of the search, a helicopter joined the operation. It flew over hard-to-reach areas, rocks and gorges, but there were no traces. By July 20th, rescuers began to doubt the version of the lost tourists. They were alarmed that none of the family's belongings had been found. Even if they had gone off the trail, at least some fragments of clothing, a backpack, or shoe tracks should have been left behind, but there was nothing. In the fall of 1987, a shepherd named Joseph Grabar, while driving his cattle through a valley near Lake Poprada, came across something strange. In one of the rocky crevices, overgrown with moss and lichens, he noticed a piece of cloth stuck between rocks. When he picked it up, it turned out to be a child's sweater. Worn, faded, but with no signs of decomposition. Joseph immediately reported it to the local mountain rescue post. The discovered sweater was handed over to the police, who compared it to the description of the clothes worn by Lenka Stanek on the day she disappeared. The match was almost complete. A light blue knitted sweater with a bear cub embroidered on the chest. The strangest thing was the place of the discovery. This crevice was located only a kilometer away from the main hiking trail the family was on, but it had been searched more than once. Rescuers claimed to have been up there several times over the years. Why hadn't they found the sweater sooner? What's more, it didn't look like it had been in the wilderness for 4 years. No footprints were found nearby, no bones, no other articles of clothing. There was nothing around to explain how he got there. The only theory the police were considering was that the sweater had been planted, but by whom and why? The rescuers climbed up into the crevasse and began a new search. They examined every rock, looked into caves, sifted the ground, but found nothing else. No Rudolph, no Veronica, no Lenka. The family disappeared just like they did 4 years ago. The only clue was a sweater that appeared where it wasn't supposed to be. That incident quickly became a rumor. Some said that the Stanek family had been led away into the forest by an unknown force. Others said that there were hidden underground tunnels in the Tatras where they could have gotten lost. But even after decades, their disappearance remains one of the strangest mysteries of the Slovak mountains. The Bielanske Tatras are a small but picturesque mountain range in northeastern Slovakia, known for their limestone ridges, sparse caves, and suddenly changing weather. Local foresters and mountain rescuers have repeatedly said that it is easy to get lost in these places. Dense fogs, deep ravines, and rocky precipices make any walk potentially dangerous. Peter Lanic had been a forester since 1974 and was a seasoned expert on the local trails. His job was to monitor the condition of the forest, checking for illegal logging and poachers. He knew the Bielanski Tatras like the back of his hand, which makes his disappearance in 1981 even stranger. On October 10, 1981, Lanic rode out on his horse from early morning. That day he was to inspect sections of the forest in the trail area below the Jarno Massif. He planned to return in the evening, but he did not. His colleagues did not sound the alarm immediately, suggesting that he might have stayed overnight in one of the old forest cabins. The next morning, the forest rangers went in search of him. They found the horse fairly quickly. It was tied up at one of the old oaks near the beginning of the trail. Apparently, Lanic had left it there himself, intending to continue on foot. However, he was nowhere to be found. Surveying the nearby ravines and gorges, the foresters found no signs of a struggle or accident. There were no signs of a rock slide, fallen trees, or signs of a wild animal attack. It seemed as if he had simply vanished. In the following days, a full-scale search began. Rescuers combed trails, gorges, and forests within a radius of 10 kilometers. Dogs were used, but they were unable to pick up the trail. It was as if the man had simply disappeared. Helicopters flew over dangerous areas, but no clothes, no backpack, no traces of Lanic were found. Various theories have been considered. One of them was an accident. However, in such a case, his body would surely have been found, because every possible chasm and cliff had been thoroughly examined. The second theory was that he had been attacked by a wild animal. However, this too did not explain the absence of any trace of blood or remnants of clothing. After a few weeks, the search was called off. Lanic was officially reported missing. 9 years later, in 1990, a group of speleologists explored a hard-to-reach cave in the Bielianske Tatras, near the Polish border. In one of the stone crevices, they came across an old pocket knife wedged between rocks. The find sparked renewed interest in the disappearance of the forester. The cave was 15 kilometers from where they found his horse. How could he have ended up there? Moreover, the way to this cave was difficult. It passed through steep slopes and rocky areas that required mountaineering equipment. Even an experienced climber would have had a hard time getting there without specialized equipment. After the discovery of the knife, many theories emerged. One of them suggested that Lanic had been kidnapped. But by whom and why? He had no enemies, was not involved in anything that could attract criminal elements. It is also unclear why his item was found in a cave, a place he probably never entered. Another hypothesis suggested that he had gotten lost, but then why was his body not found in any of the possible search areas? Besides, experienced foresters rarely lose their bearings in familiar terrain. Some locals have put forward more mystical speculations. In the Bielanski Tatras, there are legends about zones of silence, places where the usual laws of nature are broken. In these areas, people supposedly lose their bearings and sometimes disappear without a trace. Could Lanic have been a victim of such a phenomenon? Others drew attention to stories of strange lights that can sometimes be seen in the mountains. On the night of his disappearance, several locals allegedly saw bluish flickering flashes near his route. Coincidence? There was no official investigation after the knife was found. Investigators had no reason to believe that a crime had taken place. The fact of the find was explained simply. Perhaps the knife was lost by someone else, although the initials on the handle clearly pointed to Lanic. In 1993, Peter Lanic was officially recognized as dead. His family never received answers to their questions. The story of his disappearance has remained one of the most mysterious in the Bielanski Tatras. Speleologists who found the knife later recounted that the cave where it was discovered had given them an unsettling feeling ever since. Some claim that after the discovery they heard strange sounds at night, resembling footsteps inside the tunnels. But no explanation for this has ever been found. The legend of the forester who disappeared in the Bielansky Tatras is still passed on among locals. Years and decades pass, but the answers to these mysteries never appear. The High Tatras remain a place where a person can disappear without a trace, where search teams scour the area for months without finding a single clue. Each new case adds another name to the list of missing persons, another unsolved mystery. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. See you soon. See you in the next episodes. Alaska, with its rugged landscapes and vast wilderness areas, is known for many mysterious disappearances. One such place is the so-called Alaskan Triangle, the area between the cities of Anchorage, Juneau, and Barrow. Since the early 1970s, more than 20,000 people have disappeared without a trace in this region. This region is not only known for disappearances, but also for reports of UFO sightings, Bigfoot sightings, and other paranormal phenomena. Some researchers have linked these events to possible electromagnetic anomalies or even suspected underground bases. Despite the various theories, the exact causes of the many disappearances in Alaska remain unclear, adding even more mystery to this harsh and mysterious region. In this episode, you'll hear two stories of mysterious disappearances whose answers still remain hidden. On October 16, 1972, a small Cessna 310 airplane took off from Anchorage, Alaska. Its final destination was the city of Juneau, where the group was headed for an important political event. On board were 4 people: Hale Boggs, Majority Leader of the U.S. House of Representatives; Nick Begich, a congressman from Alaska; their assistant, Russell Brown; and the pilot, Don Jones. The weather that day was far from ideal. The sky was overcast, the wind was picking up, and forecasts predicted possible snow. Despite this, the flight was authorized. The politicians rushed to Juneau, where Begich was scheduled to address voters. For him, the trip was an important part of his re-election campaign. The plane took off at 9 a.m., but it never reached its destination. After takeoff, the plane kept its course along the V-317 air route, which runs along the coast of Alaska. This was one of the safest routes for small airplanes because its boundaries were well known to the pilots, and landmarks were located along the route. Don Jones, the pilot of the Cessna 310, was an experienced pilot. He had flown in bad weather many times before. Hale Boggs and Nick Begich were on board discussing the upcoming meeting, and Russell Brown was reviewing notes. The flight was going well until the weather started to deteriorate. An hour after takeoff, heavy snow began to fall, visibility dropped dramatically, and the wind became even stronger. The last radio signal from the airplane was received at 10:15 a.m. After that, communication with the airplane was cut off. When the plane did not arrive in Juneau at the scheduled time, dispatchers attempted to contact the pilot but received no response. Several hours later, a search began. Dispatchers relayed the information to search and rescue. Such incidents are not uncommon in Alaska. Wildlife, harsh conditions, and vast distances create an ideal ground for incidents. However, this case was particularly alarming because there were important political figures on board. The search and rescue operation began quickly. Search parties, including Coast Guard and Air Force helicopters, began combing the suspected route of the plane. But the task was daunting. The weather remained bad and the area to be searched was vast. Teams on the ground and in the air checked the V-317 route, forested areas, mountainous areas, and the coast of Prince William Bay. Divers explored the coastal waters, but no wreckage of the airplane was found. Each day of the search brought hope, but also disappointment. Pilots told how the wind tossed their airplanes from side to side, and thick snow obscured any possible signs of a crash. Strange reports surfaced during the search. One local resident said he saw a small airplane flying low over the trees on the day of the disappearance. He also heard a loud sound that sounded like an engine failure. However, this information could not be confirmed. A scrap of paper resembling documents that could have belonged to the passengers was found at another location, but experts could not prove it was related to the disappearance of the Cessna 310. Each find seemed to be able to shed light on what had happened, but nothing concrete ever emerged. When the search for the Cessna 310 airplane failed, different theories began to emerge as to what may have happened. The first and most obvious theory has to do with severe weather conditions. On the day of the flight, strong winds raged in Alaska, and visibility was minimal due to thick cloud cover and snowfall. Many experts believed that the airplane may have encountered icing. This phenomenon is dangerous for small aircraft because ice weighs down the wings and reduces controllability. The icing could have damaged the engine or worsened the aerodynamics of the airplane, leading to a crash. The second theory considered a technical malfunction of the airplane. Although the Cessna 310 was considered a reliable model, nothing ruled out the possibility of a sudden engine failure, fuel system problems, or navigation equipment problems. Any of these malfunctions could have been fatal in poor visibility conditions. However, the absence of airplane wreckage made it impossible to confirm or deny this hypothesis. Some have put forward a version of human error. Despite the experience of pilot Don Jones, stressful conditions such as turbulence and reduced visibility could have led to the error. In Alaska, where the landscape is a combination of mountains, glaciers, and forests, even a slight deviation from course can be deadly. The pilot may have made a poor decision in trying to avoid the bad weather, and this led to the crash. A more unusual theory has to do with the political activities of Hale Boggs. At the time, he was a member of the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Boggs publicly expressed doubts about the commission's findings, which led to much speculation. Some have speculated that the plane's disappearance may have been planned to silence him. While this theory sounds like part of a spy novel, its popularity confirms how much people tend to look for ulterior motives in unexplained events. Finally, there have been some fantastic speculations as well. Alaska is known for its legends of mysterious forces and anomalous phenomena. Some have claimed that the airplane may have fallen into some sort of anomaly, disappearing in an area known as the Alaskan Triangle. While such theories lack scientific evidence, they emphasize the mystical halo surrounding the tragedy. All of these theories, from weather conditions to conspiracy theories, add to the mystique of the plane's disappearance. But the lack of evidence makes each of them mere speculation, unsupported by facts. The mystery remains unsolved, and perhaps the answers to the fate of Hale Boggs, Nick Begich, and their companions will forever remain hidden in the harsh Alaskan wilderness. The mystery of the disappearance of the Cessna 310 airplane carrying Hale Boggs, Nick Begich, and their companions remains one of the most enigmatic pages in aviation history. Despite decades of searches and theories, no wreckage or trace of the passengers has ever been found. The nature of Alaska, with its vast forests, glaciers, and harsh conditions, seems to have erased all traces of this tragic event. Perhaps this great mystery will forever remain hidden in the cold embrace of the northern state, leaving us to wonder what happened on that fateful day of October 16, 1972. Gary Frank Sotherden was what has often been called a true adventurer. Born and raised in New York City, he felt drawn to the wilderness from an early age. Gary loved reading stories about the lives of pioneers, and one day he decided he had to experience for himself what he had only read about. At the age of 25, in the mid-1970s, he traveled to one of the wildest and most unexplored places in the world, Alaska. His goal was to hunt and test himself in an environment that would not forgive mistakes. Gary was well prepared. He had carefully studied maps, stocked up on gear, and spent months in training before the trip. But even with his experience and knowledge, Alaska's nature proved stronger. Before his expedition, Gary told his friends that he was going hunting in the Porcupine River areas of northeastern Alaska. This region was known for its isolation, harsh conditions, and abundance of wildlife. For Gary, it was the perfect place, quiet, remote, and full of challenges. He took everything he needed with him: a hunting rifle, a sturdy tent, warm clothes, dry rations, and a map. Before leaving, he told his family that he planned to return in 2 weeks and would contact them as soon as he was in range. What he didn't realize, however, was that his journey would end much sooner. In the first letters sent from the small town in southern Alaska, Gary wrote that everything was going according to plan. He described how he had reached the Porcupine River, set up camp, and started exploring. The wilderness impressed him. Huge forests, vast clearings, and herds of elk he saw at dawn. In his notes, he mentioned that the region was full of grizzly bears. Despite this, he felt confident. Gary knew how to behave in the presence of predators. He carried a shotgun and followed all safety rules. The last time Gary made contact was through the radio station. He reported that he was going deep into the woods to try his luck at hunting elk. This was September 12, 1970s. The exact date remains unknown. After that, communication broke down. When Gary didn't return home on the appointed day, his family became concerned. After a week without news, they contacted the local authorities, and a search and rescue operation was organized. The search for Gary lasted almost a month. Rescue teams, including local hunters, scoured the woods along the Porcupine River. They found his camp, which looked abandoned. A rifle lay nearby, but Gary himself was gone. One of the rescuers noticed strange tracks that led away from the camp toward the river. They broke off at the bank, and no amount of effort could find anything further. At the time, many speculated that Gary might have drowned while trying to cross the river, or been the victim of a wild animal attack. However, the lack of signs of struggle or blood made these theories doubtful. After the search officially ended in the 1970s, Gary Frank Sotherden's name repeatedly came up in the conversations of locals and hunters visiting the Porcupine River area. To them, it became a kind of local legend. They spoke of a young, enthusiastic soul who dared to challenge the Alaskan wilderness, but was never able to conquer it. Gary's family, who lived in New York, never gave up hope. They wrote letters to the local authorities, tried to organize private searches, appealed to local guides to perhaps explore lesser-known areas. However, nothing new could be found. Over time, the story began to grow with rumors and speculation. There were those who believed that Gary might have passed out in the woods, perhaps due to injury or illness, and his body had simply disappeared over time due to the harsh nature. Others speculated that he may have encountered poachers or illegal gold miners who may have covered up any trace of his presence. The version of a bear attack gained particular popularity. This area of Alaska was known as a place with high grizzly bear activity. Bears could be especially aggressive at that time because of the breeding season or the search for food before the onset of winter. People who have traveled to the area have reported that the huge predators can sometimes be seen patrolling the banks of the river in search of salmon. If Gary was in their path, he had little chance of escape. At the same time, the lack of concrete evidence raised doubts. Many asked, if it was a bear attack, why was Gary's rifle left untouched at his camp? Why were there no signs of a struggle? Perhaps he didn't have time to run to the gun. Or did it all happen so quickly that he didn't even realize he was being attacked? There were also stories from locals about strange finds. Some claimed that a few years after his disappearance, someone had found scraps of cloth or pieces of equipment that could have belonged to Gary. But those rumors remained unconfirmed. With each passing year, the Sotherden family grew less and less hopeful of a happy outcome. Gary's parents died before they knew what had happened to their son. The only ones left were his brother and sister, who continued to believe that one day the answer would be found. This mystery also affected those who visited these places. Many hunters reported feeling an inexplicable unease as they passed through the woods near the Porcupine River. Some claimed to have heard strange sounds or seen shadows among the trees, as if nature itself had left traces of the tragedy in its memory. The decades-long mystery became not only a personal tragedy for the Sotherden family, but also a part of Alaska's history. It was a case that reminded everyone that even the most prepared people can face the unpredictable and cruel side of the wilderness. More than 20 years later, in 1997, a hunter exploring the Porcupine River area made an eerie discovery. He discovered a human skull on the riverbank. Apparently, the remains had been there for many years. The skull was among the rocks, partially hidden by vegetation. The hunter reported the find to the police, and the remains were sent for examination. But in the 1990s, identification technology was limited, and it was not possible to identify the person at that time. The skull remained in an archive of unidentified remains in Alaska. In 2022, almost 50 years after Gary's disappearance, scientists used modern DNA analysis technology to try to establish the identity of the skull they found. By comparing the DNA with samples from Sotherden's relatives, they confirmed that the remains belonged to him. Experts also suggested that Gary may have been the victim of a bear attack. Marks characteristic of grizzly bites were found on his skull. It is likely that he had an encounter with a bear in the woods, and this was the cause of his death. The 2022 discovery came as a shock to the Sotherden family. Although they finally learned what happened to Gary, it didn't bring complete comfort. His sister said in an interview, "We've waited so long for answers, and now they've come. But that doesn't make the pain of loss any less." Gary Frank Sotherden's story was a reminder of how dangerous and unpredictable Alaska's nature is. Even for experienced hunters and hikers, the wilderness can be a deadly challenge. Gary Frank Sotherden traveled to Alaska with a dream to test himself and see the real wilderness. His story is a tragic reminder that even a well-trained man can be powerless before the might of nature. The mystery of his decades-long disappearance has finally been solved, but questions remain. How exactly did the bear encounter happen? Why were its remains found so far from the camp? The answers may never be known, hidden in the forests of Alaska. That's it. Put likes, write comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel not to miss new stories. Thanks for being with us, and see you in the next episodes. Mysterious disappearances, bright flashes of light, and whispers of extraterrestrial intelligence. These stories sound like science fiction, but what if they are true? Scotland's A70, the forests of Arizona, and the quiet highways of New Hampshire have witnessed events that have changed the lives of ordinary people forever. Today we will tell you about 3 of the most mysterious cases of disappearances of people who, as it turned out, were soon abducted by UFOs. These cases are not just shocking, but also make you think about how we are not alone in the universe. The incident on the A70 road in Scotland, known as the Gary Wood and Colin Wrighton abduction incident, still raises many questions and remains one of the most talked about stories in ufology. The story began in August 1992 when 2 friends, 33-year-old ambulance driver Gary Wood and 29-year-old engineer Colin Wrighton, traveled to the small village of Tarbrax near Edinburgh. They were traveling along the A70 road, known for its seclusion and relatively little traffic. The day started as a normal drive. Gary was driving, and Colin, seated in the passenger seat, was talking relaxedly about an upcoming visit to a friend. They planned to be back in Edinburgh in a couple of hours. It was a warm summer night outside, and nothing looked like trouble. The A70 road, surrounded by dense woods and hills, seemed calm. However, as the car approached one of the darkest and most secluded parts of the road, Gary noticed something strange. Up ahead, hovering over the highway, was an oval-shaped black object. This object, according to Gary, was perfectly still and made no sound. Its surface seemed to be frosted, as if it was absorbing light. Colin, who noticed the object a few seconds later, immediately felt alarmed. The friends tried to understand what was in front of them. It could be a large drone, an experimental airplane, or even a strange optical phenomenon. Gary decided to keep driving, believing that the phenomenon could simply be detoured, but the closer they got, the more pressure was felt, which they described as a strange feeling of heaviness in their chests. When the car was directly under the object, suddenly everything around them was plunged into deep darkness. The car's headlights no longer illuminated the road, and the engine stopped running. It was a silence so absolute that it was almost deafening. The next thing they remembered was the sensation of free fall. Both men later described that their bodies felt as if they were suspended in the air, and everything around them became increasingly blurred. After that, it was as if their consciousness turned off. When Gary and Colin regained consciousness, they found themselves in the same car parked on the side of the road. The feeling of heaviness was gone, and the engine was running again. However, something was wrong. The clock in the car indicated that it had been about 2 hours since they had seen the object, although the entire trip should have taken no more than 30 minutes. The friends felt overwhelmed. Their bodies felt as if they were paralyzed with fatigue, and their thoughts were confused. They continued in silence to Tarbrax, but never spoke another word about what had happened that night. Each of them tried to make sense of what had happened, but they found it difficult to explain exactly what had happened. In the days that followed, both men began to notice that their mental state was deteriorating. Gary began having nightmares in which he saw bright lights and strange figures with large eyes. Colin suffered from a constant sense of anxiety and fear, especially at night. They avoided discussing the incident, but both felt that something extremely strange had happened to them. After a few weeks, Gary, whose condition had become unbearable, decided to seek help from ufologist Malcolm Robinson, who was at the time investigating paranormal phenomena in Scotland. Robinson held several meetings with the men to gather as much information about the incident as possible. To help Gary and Colin make sense of what had happened, Robinson suggested hypnotic regression. This was a technique often used to retrieve repressed memories. During the sessions, which took place several days apart, shocking details began to surface. Gary was the first to describe what happened after they lost consciousness. He recalled that he and Colin were lifted into a bright circle of light that he later realized was coming from the object. It was as if their bodies were floating, devoid of control over movement. They then found themselves in a white room with blindingly bright walls. The men described humanoid beings that surrounded them. These beings were about 1.5 meters tall, with large black eyes, gray skin, and long, thin fingers. They didn't speak, but their intentions seemed to be transmitted telepathically. Gary remembered being placed on a cold metal table and being unable to move. His body was being scanned by strange devices that made no noise but created a tingling sensation on his skin. Colin recalled that he had also been subjected to an examination, but he retained fewer details. He described feeling like he was under anesthesia. His consciousness blacked out intermittently. After hypnotic sessions, Gary and Colin began to relate their physical and psychological symptoms to their experiences. Gary discovered a small round mark on his arm that had not been there before, and Colin complained of constant headaches and insomnia. These physical effects reinforced their belief that what had happened was real. Both men decided to tell their story to the public. This decision was not an easy one, as they realized that they could be labeled liars or insane. However, their revelations attracted the attention of both ufologists and the media. The case caused a storm of discussion, and many considered it one of the most compelling examples of a UFO abduction. The incident on the A70 road became the subject of television programs and documentaries. Skeptics claimed that the men's memories could have been caused by false memories or the effects of hypnosis. Some speculated that it could have been a prank or an attempt to attract attention. However, many paranormal phenomenon researchers claimed that the details described by Gary and Colin matched other abduction cases around the world. Ufologists investigating the incident noted that the A70 road already had a reputation for strange phenomena. Several drivers have reported glowing objects and anomalous sounds in the area, although no case has received as much attention as Gary and Colin's story. More than 30 years have passed, but the story of Gary Wood and Colin Wrighton continues to be an important part of ufological history. For many, the event remains proof of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. For others, a reminder of how easily the human mind can create complex and detailed stories under the influence of stress or hypnosis. The beginning of Betty and Barney Hill's story set the stage for many accounts of alleged UFO abductions and became one of the most famous cases in the history of ufology. The Hill couple were an ordinary couple leading a typical middle-class life. They lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, USA, and were known in their community for their active participation in social activities. Betty worked in social assistance, and Barney was a postal clerk. Their interracial marriage was a rarity in the 1960s, but this only emphasized their fortitude and mutual support. In September 1961, seeking a break from the daily grind, the couple took a vacation to Canada. The trip was planned as a short but pleasant vacation. They enjoyed the scenic views, discussed future plans, and simply enjoyed each other. However, their return home was the beginning of one of the most mysterious and frightening episodes of their lives. On September 19, 1961, at about 10:30 p.m., the Hills were driving on a deserted road through the White Mountains. The night was clear, the stars shining brightly in the sky. Betty, sitting in the passenger seat, noticed a strange light in the sky. She initially thought it was a star or a falling meteorite, but the object behaved unusually. It moved in a zigzag pattern, rising and falling and then hovering in the air. Betty called Barney's attention to this light, and they decided to pull over to the side of the road to get a better look at the object through binoculars. Betty noticed that the object was disc-shaped and rotating, with multicolored lights flashing around it. Barney, skeptical at first, watched the object and tried to find a rational explanation. However, as the object began to get closer, their curiosity was replaced by anxiety. Barney, feeling compelled to figure out what was going on, got out of the car, taking his binoculars with him. The object hovered over a field a few dozen meters away from him. Barney saw that it had portholes on it, and there were humanoid-looking figures inside. He recalled the feeling of terror that had gripped him when he realized that these beings were looking directly at him. Realizing that the situation was becoming dangerous, Barney hurriedly returned to the car. He told Betty to close the windows and they continued on their way, but the object continued to follow them. There were strange, buzzing sounds on the road, and their car seemed to be responding to these signals. Both felt inexplicably drowsy, and their consciousness seemed to sink into darkness. When the Hills awoke, they were already 56 kilometers from where they had observed the object. They had no idea what had happened in those 2 hours. This lost time became an unsolvable mystery that they did not try to solve until months later. Upon returning home, Betty and Barney immediately noticed the oddities. Barney's clothes were damaged, and strange circles appeared on the paintwork of their car that reacted to a magnet. Betty soon began having vivid and disturbing dreams in which alien beings were performing medical experiments on them. These dreams were so realistic that she decided to write them down. Barney, in turn, began to suffer from severe stress, insomnia, and panic attacks. His health was deteriorating, and he felt inexplicably anxious whenever he looked up at the night sky. The couple sought medical help, but traditional treatments were not working. In 1964, almost 3 years after the event, the Hills turned to Dr. Benjamin Simon, a renowned psychiatrist who specialized in hypnosis. Dr. Simon decided to use hypnotic regression to help the couple recover their lost memories. Over several sessions, Betty and Barney separately recounted their experiences, and their descriptions matched in frightening detail. They recalled how their car stopped in the road, and humanoid beings approached them and asked them to get out. No significant effort on the part of the creatures was required. Betty and Barney complied as if under hypnosis. They were escorted aboard the ship, where they were separated. On board the ship, according to Betty, she was placed on a table and began to be examined. The beings used strange instruments to examine her skin, hair, and eyes. One of the beings inserted a long needle into her belly, explaining that it was a pregnancy test. Betty remembered feeling pain, but one of the creatures touched her head, and the pain immediately disappeared. Barney recalled having a suction cup-like device placed on him to examine his genitals. He also described how samples of his skin and fingernails were taken. Barney felt intense fear and distressed, but, like Betty, was unable to resist. One of the most unusual elements of Betty's memories was the star map the creatures showed her. She described it as a three-dimensional hologram that labeled the stars and the routes between them. Betty asked where they had come from, but got only an evasive answer. Years later, Betty drew this map, and amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish suggested that it corresponded to the Zeta Grid star system. This conclusion attracted enormous interest but was criticized for lack of scientific evidence. The story of Betty and Barney Hill spread quickly, becoming the first widely publicized UFO abduction story. It generated both interest and skepticism. Some believed that their memories were the result of shared fantasies or the influence of dreams. Others argued that hypnosis may have induced false memories. Despite the criticism, the Hills remained steadfast in their version of events. They were not seeking fame or financial gain, and their story continued to inspire ufologists and researchers of anomalous phenomena. The case of Betty and Barney Hill was a turning point in the study of the UFO phenomenon. It not only caught the public's attention, but also laid the groundwork for many other abduction stories. Today, the story remains one of the most discussed and researched in the field of ufology, raising questions about the nature of human perception and the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. Travis Walton's story began on November 5th, 1975, in the mountains of the Apache Sitgraves National Forest in Arizona, USA. The case became one of the most discussed and documented cases of alleged UFO abduction. For decades, the incident has sparked controversy among skeptics, ufologists, and the public, but the details of this story remain amazing and thought-provoking. Travis Walton was a young logger, 22 years old, who was working with a crew of 6 men to clear a forest in a remote mountainous area. His supervisor was Mike Rogers, who had won government logging contracts for several years in a row. Mike, Travis, and their co-workers, Alan Dallas, John Goulet, Ken Peterson, Dwayne Smith, and Steve Pierce, were regular laborers who knew each other well and often worked under extreme conditions. Their workday was coming to an end that day, and the men were loading their tools into Mike's pickup truck, preparing to head home. Evening came, and the sky over the mountains was draped in darkness. The group, tired from a long day of work, was excited to hit the road back to Snowflake, the small town in Arizona where they lived. As the pickup truck traveled through the winding forest roads, the men noticed an unusual light shining through the trees ahead. It was not the usual light of a headlight or flashlight, but a bright and intense glow of a golden white color that made them uneasy. At first they thought it might be a fire, but as they got closer, they realized they were wrong. When the pickup truck pulled into an open clearing, they saw an incredible sight. Above the ground, about 30 meters from their vehicle, hovered a large disc-like object. Its surface shimmered with metallic luster, and a strange glow emanated from its base. The UFO was about 6 meters in diameter and seemed completely motionless. The whole group froze in amazement. No one said a word until Travis, amazed by what he saw, suddenly jumped out of the car. Before anyone could stop him, he walked straight toward the object. His co-workers yelled at him to come back, but Travis ignored their warnings. His curiosity and daring took over. As Travis approached the UFO about 10 meters away, the object began to emit a low, vibrating sound. Suddenly, a bright beam of blue light erupted from the base of the disc and struck Travis directly. He flew up into the air like a doll and fell to the ground motionless. This scene shocked the others. They described that the beam of light was so bright that they instinctively closed their eyes. When the light went out, they saw Travis lying on the ground unmoving. In a panic, Mike Rogers stepped on the gas and the pickup truck with the other men sped away from the scene. A few miles away from the scene, they stopped, realized they had left Travis alone, and began to argue about what to do next. Mike, still in shock, suggested they go back and try to find him. Despite their fear, the men agreed. When they returned, the UFO was gone, and Travis was gone with it. They searched the entire clearing, calling out his name, but found no trace of him. The realization that their friend had disappeared under such mysterious circumstances filled them with horror. The men decided to return to Snowflake and report the incident to the local authorities. When they arrived at the police station, their stories were met with skepticism. Sheriff Gillespie, who took the report, initially thought it might have been the result of collective stress or a joke. However, the seriousness and apparent shock in the witnesses' voices led him to launch an investigation. The next day, a search party was dispatched to the scene. They searched the woods for Travis for several days, using helicopters, dogs, and volunteers, but no trace was found. Meanwhile, rumors of the incident began to spread through the town. Many people began accusing the men of killing Travis and hiding his body. Pressure from the public and the police was mounting. 5 days later, on the night of November 10th, Travis made an unexpected appearance. He called his brother Dwayne from a payphone and asked him to come get him. When Dwayne found him, Travis was in a state of extreme exhaustion and disorientation. He looked like he had been through a serious ordeal. Travis later told his version of events. He remembered the beam of light hitting him, and then he woke up aboard a strange ship. He was in a small room with a low ceiling surrounded by humanoids with large heads, large black eyes, and gray skin. Their faces expressed no emotion, but he could sense their intentions telepathically. Travis tried to resist, and even attacked one of the creatures, grabbing some sort of metal object. Then figures entered the room that looked like humans, but with an unusually perfect appearance. They took him to another room, where they placed him on a table and examined him. After this, his memory becomes blurred. Travis's return sparked even more controversy. Skeptics claim that his story could have been a fabrication to cover up some other circumstances of his disappearance. However, ufologists considered the case to be one of the most convincing examples of a UFO abduction because it had numerous witnesses and physical evidence. Travis was subjected to a polygraph, which he passed. His co-workers also took a polygraph, and their results confirmed their version of events. This further strengthened the belief of Travis's supporters in his story. For Travis himself, the incident was not only a test, but also a curse. He repeatedly stated that he wished it had never happened. He had to live with the stigma of being the man abducted by a UFO, which led to constant scrutiny from the public and the press. That's all for today. Thank you for watching to the end and diving with us into the world of mystery stories. Did you like it? Then give us a like and subscribe so we don't miss more exciting episodes. And in the comments, tell us what you think about these cases or share your unusual stories. Maybe we will tell about them in the next videos. See you soon, friends. Bye. The mystery of the disappearance in the Valley of the Dead. What happened to two experienced loggers who went into the woods and never came back? Gunshot residue, suspicious evidence, and most eerie of all, the inexplicable feeling that someone was after them. Was it an atrocity of nature, a sinister criminal plot, or something far more mystical? Buckle up, because this story keeps you in suspense until the very end. And yes, don't forget to watch to the end. You might be the one to spot the detail that will change everything. At the beginning of a subarctic summer in June 2005, two old friends, Frederick Hardesty and David Horsey, members of the Dean people, decided to spend a few days in the wilderness of the Nahani River Valley. This place is located about 120 kilometers northwest of Fort Simpson, Canada. They planned to stay in a small cabin on the riverbank, owned by their friend Rod Gunderson. On Sunday, June 12th, the friends gathered their gear, loaded it into Rod's boat, who volunteered to drive them to the cabin, and set off. Just a few days later, however, the trip turned tragic, and Fort Simpson was thrust into the spotlight because of a mysterious accident. When Rod returned on Thursday, June 16th, to pick up the men, he found the cabin locked and no one inside. In front of the structure, evidence of a campfire was prominently displayed. Gunderson speculated that the men might have returned to Fort Simpson by another route and called his wife on a satellite phone to verify this. But despite a search of the town, neither David nor Frederick was there. Anxiety grew, and the next morning the family contacted the police. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched an investigation. On Saturday, June 18th, they were joined by volunteers from the local community as well as members of the Department of Environment. Helicopters, boats, and teams on the ground explored the area, hoping to find the men or any sign of their presence. During the search, a sock and shoe belonging to one of the missing men were found. They were located near a creek about 4 kilometers from the cabin. Footprints around the spot indicated that the men had not run away, but were walking quietly, which seemed unusual. There were wolf and bear paw prints nearby, but no signs of animal attacks. The situation became more complicated when on Monday the thermal cameras used in the aerial survey showed no signs of heat. On Tuesday it was learned that in addition to the fire in front of the cabin, the men had built another fire downstream of the river. An empty fuel canister was found near that fire, raising questions. Why would 2 experienced loggers need to build a second fire? It all seemed suspicious to Gunderson and family members. Don Hardesty, Frederick's cousin, publicly expressed frustration with the slow start of the search. He stated, "We are talking about 2 of our people and they deserve better. If these were people from southern Canada, the search operation would have started immediately." Police, for their part, attributed the delay to a lack of initial information. Temperatures in the region were low at the time, dropping to freezing at night. Such weather posed a danger to the men, especially if they found themselves in the water. After several days of searching, David Horsey's body was found on June 27th in dense woods about 3.7 kilometers from the cabin. Burn marks were found on his hands and forearms, raising new questions. What could have caused these burns? Was it an accident or evidence of something more sinister? His body was sent to Edmonton for a forensic examination, which determined that the cause of death was hypothermia. The discovery of David's body generated a mixture of emotions among members of the search team and his family. Some were relieved that there was finally clarity. "Now at least we know where he is," said one search team member, "but it doesn't answer all the questions." Meanwhile, the search for Frederick Hardesty continued. Families, concerned about the slow progress of the official investigation, began gathering their own resources and recruiting volunteers. Relatives felt that the Royal Mounted Police were not paying enough attention to the case, which created a sense of frustration and distrust in the authorities. If this had happened to someone else, the reaction would have been very different, one relative said. On July 5th, a specially trained search dog was attached to the operation. 2 days later, on July 7th, Frederick Hardesty's body was found in the Nahani River, trapped in a log jam about 20 kilometers downstream from the cabin. A preliminary autopsy revealed that the cause of death was drowning. Temperatures in the region that night likely played a key role in his death. All the while, many questions remained. Why did 2 experienced loggers, who knew the terrain and how to survive in the wilderness, suddenly leave their weapons and supplies behind and abandon the cabin? What happened between the moment of their arrival and the tragic outcome? And what could have caused them to start a second fire and use fuel? Relatives and loved ones demanded explanations. One family member noted that the shirt Frederick found had a hole on it that looked like a shotgun blast, and there were gunshot marks around the cabin. They also pointed out the many shotgun shell casings found at the scene. These details led them to doubt that the case could be considered an accident. However, the police insisted that both men did not have injuries characteristic of gunshot wounds. Despite the discovery of the bodies, the mystery of the accident remained unsolved. Relatives of Hardesty and Horsey continued to question the police actions. They pointed to many inconsistencies in the investigation, ranging from the delay in starting the search to the oddities found around the cabin. According to them, police officers did not properly survey the scene. "We found shell casings and gunshot residue on our own, but the police refused to investigate further," said Frederick's brother Robert Hardesty. Some family members believed important evidence may have been hidden. Additional evidence surfaced. Someone noticed evidence of a fire on the ground near the cabin, and one of the fires had apparently been started using an accelerant. The question arose, why did men familiar with survival in the woods use such a substance, dangerous in such conditions? Was it their own decision, or were they forced to do so by circumstances? Community members from Fort Simpson and Wrigley, frustrated by the police's refusal to investigate further, organized their own search for evidence. They continued to circle the neighborhood around the cabin, surveying forest trails and the riverbed where the bodies had been found. But at some point it became more of an attempt at justice than a search for answers. Of particular concern was the fact that the police had not previously cordoned off the scene or conducted a full forensic examination. One member of the search team claimed that the hut had clearly been fired upon, with holes in the floor and walls indicating that something highly unusual may have occurred. But police said that all possible evidence had allegedly been destroyed by the search team itself. This statement caused even more outrage from the families of the victims. The families decided to seek help from independent experts. They insisted that the bodies should be re-examined to determine whether injuries such as the burns on Horthy's hands could have been linked to something criminal. They also demanded an explanation for the evidence found around the cabin, which had received little attention from the police. By July 5th, nearly a month after the disappearance, the community was still in a state of shock. Although bodies had been found, answers to key questions were missing. Why were two experienced men, accustomed to the rigors of the wilderness, in such a vulnerable position? What made them leave the safety of the hut, leaving behind weapons, food, and the supplies they needed to survive? Complicating the situation were the rumors that were increasingly spreading in Fort Simpson. Some locals began to speculate that mysterious beings or spirits associated with the ancient legends of the Nahani Valley might be behind the men's deaths. The valley has long been considered a place with a bad reputation, as evidenced by the numerous disappearances and mysterious cases that have occurred there over the decades. At a community meeting held on July 7th, elders told the story of the once missing Naha tribe. These warriors lived in the mountains and often came down to the valley to attack neighboring tribes. But one day the Naha tribe disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only frightening tales and fear of the valley. Nahani is a place where people have seen strange lights in the sky, heard mysterious sounds, and sometimes even disappeared without a trace, said one of the elders. For many community members, these stories resonated with the tragedy that occurred. In parallel, the families of the victims kept up the pressure on the police. They demanded transparency and independent experts. However, police representatives continued to claim that no evidence of a crime had been found. They referred to the experts' conclusions that Horthy died of hypothermia and Hardesty drowned, probably trying to help his friend. Meanwhile, an independent investigator hired by the families began his work. He found that the theory of accidental death did not hold up. For example, Horthy's clothes, found with suspicious burns and strange footprints around the cabin, indicated that something extraordinary might have happened before the tragedy. In addition, the empty container from the combustion gas pedal added even more questions to the official version. As the independent investigator continued to look into the case, he came across even more strange facts. He examined all the items found near the cabin and noticed shell casings and traces of shotgun pellets in the surrounding trees. These details contradicted the police's version that there were no signs of a struggle at the scene. In addition, one of the shell casings had visible marks indicating its recent use. Burns on David Horthy's hands and clothing also remained a mystery. Experts brought in by the families suggested that they could have been caused by either exposure to flames or some chemical substance. Moreover, Fred Hardesty's clothes, found with his body, were damaged as if someone had torn them off him by force. These details only heightened the relative suspicions that something more than an accident had occurred in the Nahani Valley. Meanwhile, anxiety was growing in the community. Many residents familiar with the valley's history began to recall old legends about the sinister creatures that inhabited the region. One such story told of mountain spirits that could lure people into the forest and force them to leave their shelter. Local elders claimed that such phenomena had occurred before and urged caution when visiting the valley. However, the investigator, taking a rational approach, also decided to consider the possibility that humans might have been behind the men's deaths. He discovered that in the weeks before the incident, illegal hunters had been seen in the area. It was possible that they could have influenced what was happening, or even triggered the tragedy. However, no clear evidence of their involvement was found. About a month after the bodies were found, The police announced that the case was closed. However, the families of the victims and their friends strongly disagreed. They held several meetings with police representatives demanding a new independent examination and a detailed investigation of all the circumstances of the incident. At one of the meetings organized by the families of the deceased, the community representatives expressed their sharp dissatisfaction with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. People demanded an explanation as to why the scene was not fully investigated and why the cabin was not immediately cordoned off to gather evidence. Jonas Antoine, a member of the search team, said he found shell casings and gunshot residue long before the bodies were discovered. However, he said, police ignored the evidence. There were numerous gunshot marks at the site, even in the trees around the cabin, but the Canadian Mounted Police took no action to investigate them, he said. Families of the victims also reported that a clear shotgun blast mark was found on the floor of the cabin, which could possibly be related to the events. However, police officials attributed the lack of a rapid response to the fact that in the first few days after the missing persons reports, there was no confirmation that a criminal incident had occurred. No evidence of a crime was identified, which is why the cabin was not cordoned off, said Constable Pat Shepard, a police spokesman. We acted on the available evidence and followed standard protocols. However, the families strongly disagreed. Rosemary Gill, the sister of one of the deceased, said she believed there had been serious lapses in the investigation from the outset. We found remnants of clothing with suspicious injuries, shotgun marks, and other evidence. Why was this not investigated properly? We demand justice, she said. Residents of the Lidley-Cue community from the Dene people present at the meeting emphasized that they felt aggrieved. According to them, if the case had involved residents in the southern parts of the country, the police response would have been much quicker and more extensive. Police officers said they are continuing to review the investigation and are willing to work with independent experts to identify any possible errors or shortcomings. We recognize that there are aspects that can be improved. If the families wish, we are prepared to initiate a more in-depth investigation with independent experts, said Chief Inspector Jim Cunningham. After meeting with the authorities, the families of the victims turned to independent experts expecting a more thorough investigation. However, the experts warned that because of the passage of time and lost evidence, results may be limited. Local residents familiar with the Nahani Valley area voiced their concerns. They recalled that there have been many strange events in the area over the past decades, including human disappearances and unexplained animal behavior. According to the searchers, these anomalies could be linked to the deaths of the loggers. The community and the families of the victims insisted that the approach to investigating such incidents should be reconsidered. They suggested specific measures: hiring specialists to handle difficult cases, increasing funding for search operations in remote areas, and developing protocols for interacting with local people who know the region well. However, despite the authorities' statements of readiness for change, no real steps have been taken. The families of the victims continued to demand answers to the main question: what really happened to their loved ones in the mysterious Nahani Valley? As time went on, tensions between the families of the victims, the community, and the authorities only increased. Investigations gradually collapsed, and any attempt to shed light on the circumstances of the tragedy faced bureaucratic hurdles and a lack of evidence. Local residents organized their own expeditions to the Nahani Valley. They hoped to find new evidence or at least better understand what might have happened to the experienced loggers who knew the area well. Some returned with tales of strange footprints on the ground, sounds resembling screams, and feeling as if they were being watched. However, no concrete results came from the expeditions. As time went on, the incident became less and less talked about. However, the story of Hardesty and Horsey continued to live on in local lore. It became part of the dark reputation of the Nahani Valley, which many called Headless Valley. The place became even more entrenched in people's minds as an area of mystery and danger, where nature was intertwined with something inexplicable. For the families of the victims, the tragedy has remained an open wound. They are still demanding justice and explanations, hoping that one day the truth will be revealed. But for now, questions remain unanswered, and the Nahani Valley continues to hold its dark secrets. This is the end of the story, but the mystery remains unsolved. If you like the story, please like and share your opinions in the comments. What do you think about what happened? Was it a tragic coincidence, an intervention of the forces of nature, or something more mysterious? Subscribe so you don't miss new stories, and thanks for being with us till the end. The Tatras are majestic and mysterious mountains, shrouded in a fog of legends and dark secrets. Here, among snow-capped peaks and deep valleys, people disappear, leaving behind only whispers of mysteries. Imagine, experienced tourists, professional guides, prepared for any challenge, disappear without a trace on well-known routes. What lies behind this frightening silence of the mountains? Secret underground passages, anomalous phenomena, or ancient forces of nature? In this video, we will tell you about two shocking and unexplained stories of people missing in the Tatra Mountains. Stay tuned, as each new case opens doors to the world of the unexplained. February 2016 was unusually cold for the Tatras. Snowdrifts blocked narrow trails and wind gusts swept through gorges, leaving no shelter from their icy breath. But for a group of experienced skiers from Krakow, this was part of the adventure. 5 friends, including students, engineers, and a doctor, decided to spend a few days in the mountains, skiing and enjoying the silence of the winter Tatras. The group included 5 participants, each of whom contributed to the preparation and organization of the trip. The leader and organizer was Marek Sikorsky, a 29-year-old civil engineer who already had experience with multi-day hikes in the mountains. Anna Zawadzka, a 26-year-old geography student, was in charge of route planning and detailed knowledge of the area. Thomas Plasek, a 31-year-old general practitioner, took responsibility for the medical part of the expedition. The most experienced skier and mountaineer in the group was Krzysztof Nowak, 28, who had repeatedly participated in difficult hikes in the Carpathians. The youngest member was Marta Kalinska, a 24-year-old biology student who was interested in photography and planned to take a series of pictures of the frozen lakes in the valley. Together, they were a well-prepared and well-coordinated team, ready for any difficulties. The goal of their journey was the Valley of 5 Staves, one of the most picturesque and isolated places in the Tatras. The plan was simple. Leave the settlement of Palenica Bielkanska, follow the route through the Spyglass Pass, and stop for the night at a shelter. The group would then explore the valley, photograph the frozen lakes, and return in 3 days. They left Palenica on February 14th, and despite the cold, the weather was clear. Tourists who met them on the route noted that the group was well prepared: warm clothes, modern skis, and a tent that could withstand the extreme cold. Marek, as the most experienced, carried a map and compass. Everything indicated that this journey was going to be a success. The group left Palenica Bielkanska on the morning of February 14th. The sunlight reflected off the snow-white cover, making visibility almost blinding. They moved at a good pace, carefully following the route. Passers-by who saw them on the first kilometers of their journey noted that the skiers looked confident and alert. By evening, the group reached the planned camp near the Shpiglazov Pass. Here they set up their tent, cooked a hot meal, and rested after a busy day. In a letter left in the shelter log, they noted that the weather remained stable, although the wind was picking up. This was a common occurrence for this time of year, and no one anticipated anything out of the ordinary. The next day, the group traveled onward. Their goal was clear: to explore the 5 Staves Valley, photograph the frozen lakes, and return to the refuge by evening. But as later events proved, that day was the beginning of a mystery that was never solved. When the skiers didn't make contact on the evening of the 3rd day as planned, friends and family began to worry. They knew the group was well prepared, but the lack of news was unsettling. On February 18th, the Tatra Rescue Squad received a report that the group was missing. On the morning of February 19th, rescuers from the Tatra Volunteer Search and Rescue Squad began the operation. It was one of the largest search operations at that time in the region. Colleagues of the missing, local climbers and volunteers joined the search. The rescuers started from the route indicated by the group in the shelter log. They reached the group's first camp, near Spyglass Pass, where they found their entry with a date of February 15th. The site looked neat. Tracks indicated that the group had spent the night there and left at dawn. Next, the rescuers moved on to the Valley of the Five Staves. In this area, the climate could change instantly. Wind gusts reached speeds of up to 80 kilometers. Snowfalls impaired visibility, and temperatures could drop sharply. However, on February 15th, according to the records, the weather remained relatively stable. On the third day of the search, February 21st, rescuers came across the group's tent. It was on the edge of the frozen lake Veliki Stav, the largest of the valley's lakes. The tent was in perfect condition. It had not been touched by wind or animals. Inside were skis, sleeping bags, food, and personal belongings of the skiers. However, there were no traces of the participants themselves. What was particularly disturbing was that the ski tracks leading away from the tent abruptly ended in a clearing covered with dense snow. This area was only 200 meters from the tent, but nothing further. No sign of a fall, no sign of a struggle, no sign that any of the group had tried to get back up. "It felt like they just disappeared," said one of the rescuers. There were no features in the clearing area, no dangerous cliffs or deep crevices where they could have fallen. Dogs engaged in the search were unable to pick up any scent. The search continued, covering more and more of the area around the tent. Rescuers scoured the slopes, checked cracks in the ice on the lakes, and explored the nearby woods. But the oddity was that no new trace of the group was found. By February 23rd, the weather conditions worsened. Heavy snowfalls began in the valley, and visibility dropped to a few meters. This seriously hampered the work of the rescuers, but despite the difficulties, they continued to search for the missing. The only find that raised a lot of questions was made on February 25th. At a distance of about a kilometer from the tent, in a wooded area, several things belonging to the group were found. Among them, a ski pole with the end broken off, a scarf, which according to relatives belonged to Marta Kalinska, a map of the route badly damaged by moisture, lying on the snow. These items did not provide clarity. The ski pole looked as if it had been broken by someone intentionally, or as a result of some violent impact. The scarf was on a tree branch as if it had been thrown there or caught on accidentally. The map was torn into several pieces, and rescuers speculated that it could have been torn by strong winds, but why it was so far from the tent remained a mystery. "It's like these things are scattered on purpose. It feels like someone wanted to confuse us," said a member of the search team. However, no traces of people were found near the finds. None of the dogs picked up the trail, and the thermal imaging cameras used on the slopes also showed no signs of human presence. At the same time, a version related to long-standing legends about the ghostly winds of the valley began to spread among local residents. It was believed that in winter in this area sometimes blow unusual winds that can affect the consciousness of people. Tourists who experienced such phenomena reported strange sounds, echoes of footsteps that did not match their movements, and sudden disorientation. One local guide shared his story. "Many years ago, I experienced something similar myself. We were walking with a group to a lake and suddenly heard a loud whistling wind that seemed to be coming from underground. My heart clenched with fear, and one of the hikers just dropped his backpack and ran backwards as if he was being chased by something. That's when we all decided to turn back before reaching our destination." This version made the rescuers skeptical, but added to the mystique of what was happening. By February 28th, it was clear that all the main options for surveying the area had been exhausted. The Tatra rescue squad expanded the search area to 3 kilometers around the tent. Drones with thermal imaging cameras were used to fly over forests, frozen lakes, and gorges, but no results were obtained. The ski tracks that broke off in the clearing remained a major mystery. The rescuers could not explain why the group, who had apparently left the tent, had disappeared so suddenly and without a trace. Locals who had been following the operation offered their theories. Some insisted that the hikers could have fallen into underground crevasses hidden by snow. Others spoke of an avalanche, but there was no sign of snowfall in the tent area. On March 1st, more than 2 weeks after the group disappeared, rescuers found another strange detail. At a distance of 5 kilometers from the tent, in a direction completely inconsistent with the route, a sleeping bag was found. It was lying on the side of a frozen stream. This fact stumped the rescuers. If the group was in the area, why hadn't any of them tried to contact the nearest rescue stations? Why were things so far from the main camp? After carefully examining the creek, the rescuers found no signs of a fall or struggle. It seemed as if the sleeping bag had simply been left behind by someone. By March 5th, weather conditions had deteriorated to the point where it became impossible to continue the search. Heavy snow and gusty winds made the rescuers' work dangerous. By that time, more than 50 square kilometers had been surveyed, including all the key routes in the valley. The rescue operation was officially completed on March 7, 2016. The report stated, "The reasons for the disappearance of the group of 5 remain unknown. No signs of struggle, fall, or avalanche were found. The investigation is closed." Locals and colleagues of the group have long debated what might have happened. Only mysterious finds, a tent, a ski pole, a sleeping bag, remained in the story of the disappearance. These details didn't provide answers, but only added more questions. The mystery of the disappearance in the Five Staves Valley remained unsolved. Those who heard the story said the mountains sometimes take those who try too deeply into their secrets. The fall of 2007 in the Tatras was cold but clear. Light snow covered the rocks, adding danger to the already difficult routes. Jakub Nowicki, a 38-year-old experienced mountain guide from Zakopane, set out that day to climb Orly Percy, a route known for its difficulty and requiring maximum concentration. He was in his element. Over 15 years of work, Jakub had earned a reputation as a reliable professional who could lead a group through the most difficult and dangerous sections. On September 14th, he accompanied 2 hikers, Anna and Marek, young people from Warsaw. It was their first trip on Orly Percha, and they chose Jakub precisely because of his experience. In the morning, they met at the Nahani Valley, and despite the cold wind, they set off in high spirits. Along the way, Jakub showed the tourists local sights, talked about the history of the Tatras, and constantly reminded them about safety rules. The tourists recalled that he was attentive and professional, but did not say too much. All his attention was focused on the route. By lunchtime, they reached Zavrat Pass, one of the most famous sections of Orly Percha. This was the place where a narrow path crossed the cliffs, and further on the path became even more difficult. Jakub suggested a stop to catch his breath before continuing. During the rest stop, he suddenly realized that he had left his backpack on one of the previous sections. The backpack contained his gear, first aid kit, and as he would later find out, his GPS tracker. Jakub made a quick decision. "Wait here, this area is safe. I'll be back quickly," he said. The hikers watched as he strode confidently back down the trail. His figure soon disappeared behind a rock ledge. The hikers waited for him for about an hour. When he didn't return, they became concerned. Calls to his phone were fruitless. The connection was unavailable. Deciding not to risk it, they returned to the starting point of the route and reported the guide's disappearance to the nearest rescue center. On the morning of September 15th, the rescue operation was deployed with maximum efficiency. More than 20 people joined the search, including members of the Tatra Voluntary Search and Rescue Team, TOPR, as well as Jakub's colleagues and friends. The weather remained clear but cold, which made visibility easier, although it added to the challenge for the searchers who had to work at altitude. The search began at Zavrat Pass, where the hiking group had last seen Jakub. Rescuers surveyed the route but found no obvious tracks that could indicate his whereabouts. The trails in the area were covered with gravel and rock debris, making it difficult to locate fresh tracks. By lunchtime, the search party had expanded the search area, traveling toward the more difficult sections of Orly Percha. Every meter was checked with ropes and special equipment, fearing that Jakub might have fallen into the gorge. However, no traces of his fall or debris from his equipment were found on the trails or at the foot of the cliffs. The GPS tracker that was attached to his backpack was supposed to be a clue. However, the data from the device turned out to be unusual. The tracker recorded his movements until 1436, when the signal was suddenly cut off. The last point was recorded at a trail intersection leading to a more inaccessible section of the trail. This raised many questions for the rescuers. Why would an experienced guide leave a safe route? In the evening of the same day, the rescuers surveyed the area with thermal imagers and drones, but this yielded no results. Nothing was found on the Zavrat Pass and adjacent trails to indicate Jakub's presence. Even the backpack he had gone for was not found. Jakub's colleagues, who knew him personally, could not believe what was happening. One of the rescuers, who had worked with him before, said, "Jakub was always extremely cautious. He knew these mountains better than any of us. Just disappearing without a trace was not his style." On September 16th, the rescue operation continued. It was joined by additional volunteer groups, including local mountain guides who had worked with Jakub in the past. The search area was expanded to several kilometers, covering not only Orly Perch's routes, but also adjacent valleys and slopes where Jakub might have accidentally wandered. Special attention was paid to places where he might have left his rucksack. It was believed that this was where he was headed, and finding it might provide a clue. But despite his best efforts, no backpack or any other trace was ever found. It was strange. Even if Jakub had taken off or taken shelter somewhere, his belongings should have been left behind. By mid-afternoon, a helicopter was brought in and circled the entire area within a radius of 10 kilometers. Hard-to-reach areas, gorges, and karst hollows were inspected from the air, but all to no avail. The Tatras, despite their compactness, are known for hiding anything. Meanwhile, the tourists, accompanied by Jakub, were questioned again. Anna and Marek spoke in detail about the route, Jakub's behavior, and how he left the Zavrat Pass. "He seemed calm," Anna said. "He said he would be back quickly and we could take it easy. But for some reason, he only took his jacket with him, leaving his main gear at camp." This detail further confused the rescuers. Why would an experienced guide leave the group without a backpack that contained everything they needed to survive in the mountains? On the evening of September 16th, the first and only trail appeared. One of the volunteers, surveying an area near the rocks 500 meters from the Zavrat Pass, noticed tiny pieces of cloth stuck on a ledge. They belonged to a bright red jacket, which the hikers identified as the one worn by Jakub. At this point, the trail broke off. Below it was a gorge about 60 meters deep, covered with dense bushes. The rescuers decided to go down, but even there they found nothing but small fragments of rock, which could have fallen together with something large. This discovery raised new questions. If Jakub had fallen off the trail, why had no body or other belongings been found? The forest below the gorge was too dense for anything to have been carried away by the wind or fallen below. By late afternoon, it was clear. The rescuers had exhausted their main options. The location of Jakub's disappearance remained a mystery. On September 17th, the search operation continued with even greater activity. The number of participants increased to 30 people, including specialists from other regions of Poland. They were joined by sinologists with dogs, who were trained to search not only for living people, but also for traces of human presence. The dogs immediately started working on the spot where they found pieces of fabric from Jakub's jacket. To the rescuers' surprise, the dogs led the way down the trail, but soon their trail broke off, as if Jakub had simply disappeared. This fact caused confusion among the team. "It's weird," said one of the dog handlers. "Usually dogs find at least faint tracks, but here it's as if someone has removed them." Meanwhile, the rescuers began to explore not only the ground, but also the rocks. It was decided to check all the ledges and narrow cracks where Jakub could have accidentally fallen or climbed in search of shelter. One of the rescuers recounted later, "We found several small caves, but the inside was empty. It's amazing that even in such places there was no sign of him." By the evening of September 17th, another important item had been discovered. On the slope, about a kilometer from where the GPS signal was lost, they found a carabiner for insurance. It was a sturdy climbing carabiner with scratches indicating that it had been attempted to be used on the rock. The carabiner was engraved with the initials JN, apparently belonging to Jakub, but this fact did not provide clarity. Why was the carabiner so far from the main trail? The rescuers could not understand what made Jakub deviate from the route. This place was on the border with a rugged valley that was rarely visited by even the most experienced climbers. This discovery got everyone thinking. One of Jakub's colleagues who had worked with him in the past said, "He would never go there without a reason. That site is dangerous even for the most trained. Something must have lured him there." By the time the search for Jakub Nowicki had already lasted several days, rescuers began to put forward different versions of what might have happened. The first and most logical hypothesis was that there had been an accident. Jakub could have fallen off the trail or twisted his leg trying to reach his backpack. He might have been in an inaccessible place, where his body was hidden under rocks or dense bushes. However, the absence of any traces, clothing, equipment, signs of a fall, made this version doubtful. The second hypothesis suggested that Jakub might have turned off the route because of something unusual. Some of the guide's colleagues speculated that he might have spotted a lost hiker or an animal he decided to follow. As an experienced person, Jakub had often helped others in the mountains and always felt it was his duty to come to the rescue. Perhaps he had seen something that required immediate intervention. There were more unusual theories. Some rescuers conceded that Jakub might have encountered an unexpected threat, such as a wild animal. Although the Tatras are not famous for a large number of predators, cases of aggression by bears or wolves were still recorded. However, this version did not explain why his backpack, GPS tracker, or other belongings were not found. The most controversial but discussed hypothesis was the version about the intervention of something inexplicable. The Tatras are a place shrouded in legends. Old-timers told of strange sounds that can be heard on Orly Perchey, and of sudden disappearances of people that could not be explained. Some rescuers have admitted to feeling an inexplicable sense of unease in these mountains as if someone is watching them. Each hypothesis had its weaknesses, and none of them answered the main question. Where was Jakub, and why had even his footprints disappeared? When all the main areas had been explored, the rescue operation came to an end. The rescuers did everything possible, but neither traces of Jakub Nowicki nor his belongings could be found. The legendary guide, who knew Orly Perchey better than anyone, disappeared as suddenly as the morning fog on the slopes of the Tatras. "We checked every nook, every crevice, but the mountains are silent," one of the rescuers told reporters. For his family and friends, it was a real tragedy. Jakub's colleagues, who had worked side by side with him for many years, could not believe that an experienced man, who always cared about safety, could just disappear. In the memory of all who knew him, he remained a professional who was not afraid of challenges and genuinely loved the mountains. The secrets of the Tatras remain unsolved and the disappearances remain unforgettable. The mountains that attract adventurers with their beauty hide dark secrets that may never be explained. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Or maybe you have your own mountain-related story. Write to us, and maybe it will become the topic of our next issue. See you in new mysterious videos.